On today's show, it's mailbag time. We answer your questions on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, QMJHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down your mailbag questions. We've got a bunch of questions on YouTube, Twitter, Blue Sky, you name it. You guys sent in a bunch of questions, so we'll answer a ton of them. In the first segment, we'll talk about some top 5 names in the draft. That was an interesting question we got. Second segment, we'll talk about the likes of Martone, MISA, Matt Schaefer is going to get some focus as well. We'll talk about all that in detail. In the final segment, we have a couple questions about Anton Frondel, Philippe Veilleux, some interesting names in there, including Beckett Sennecke. We got an interesting question about him. So before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get up to $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rating and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's start right away here with the first question we got from Andre S. Why is Michael Misa always listed as a left wing / center? He ranks third in the OHL for faceoffs won. I'll let you answer this. It's a very quick one, right?
He is a centerman. It really is that simple. Michael Misa has been a center night in, night out for the last 2 seasons now. Last year, he was just a very reliable middle six center for Saginaw. And this season, he's been the undoubtable 1C. And in terms of projection, with the way he thinks the game, the way he plays the game, everything just screams center. This is a center through and through. I think that left wing is going to be dropped off his profile any day now in terms of he hasn't really been playing left wing at all in at least the last 12 months. And he is a centerman. For the second question, we're staying in the OHL with a really dynamic forward there as well. Matthew Stevens asks, has Kevin He's hot start to the season changed his projection at all? How does he profile?
Well, I mean, his projection, it's debatable. I don't think it's really changed that much. I've always seen him as a potential kind of middle six forward. You saw him more as a bottom six forward in terms of upside, and your opinion's changed into middle six. He's on fire in terms of production. He's always been dynamic. He's always been this high pace scorer, and that really hasn't changed this year, right?
No, it hasn't. I think he's just very much come into his own. He's become the main man on his team with the Niagara Ice Dogs. And I mean, as a 6 foot, 181-pound left winger, he's just completely blown up the OHL this season. He was a 4th round pick by Winnipeg last season at 109th overall. And so far this year, he has 17 goals and 29 points through 19 games. He's already more than halfway to matching his 53 points from last season through 64 games. And he's very, very near the top of the OHL in both goals and points. But the next question is a rather fun one, a bit less scouting related, a bit more, if you like good names, this is the question for you. Emmett Ferguson asks, what are the best 5 names in this draft class? And a little second question attached to that. What is Theo Stockselius's ceiling and floor? Theo Stockselius, of course, has one of the better names in the draft class. But let's start off with the best names, and then we'll get to Stockselius after that. My first player in this category is Little John Mooney of the US NTDP. A fantastic name. LJ is what he goes by, but the fact that it stands for Little John is something that puts a smile on my face every single time I think of it. So he's my first name here.
100%, and he's a great number 1 here, but also need to give some love to Carter Bear, mainly because his last name is the most fitting in this draft class. He's a bear on the ice. He just absolute monster down low, very, very physical, loves to play along the boards, is always winning his puck battles down low. Loves to spin off pressure. Everything he does is under physical pressure. It's very, very interesting. So his name being that fitting puts him at 2nd overall. And in the number 3 position for the best name in the draft. By the way, we addressed this list real quick before getting started with this episode here. But at number 3, Roger McQueen is just the most WHL name I can think of, and is he's not lightning fast, but he's pretty flashy. And he's probably going to be a top 5 pick, almost definitely going to be a top 5 pick in this upcoming draft, especially once he comes back from injury and shows people again have that combination of immense size at 6'5" and deft, I forget the word, coordination. That's the word. Coordinative skill that he has at 6'5". That combination is ridiculous. And his name being Roger McQueen is just great. At number 4, we had a very good contender, Drew Shock the Fourth.
Actually, Harold Shock the Fourth is the full name.
Which is ridiculous. But he plays... does he play for the NTDP? I think he plays for the NTDP, right?
He is an undersized defenseman for the NTDP, and he hasn't been overly spectacular this season, but the name is more than enough to crack this list. Next up, we have another fantastic name, Bill Zonin. This is one that you were pushing for. Of the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies, really big, physical, playmaking forward. And Bill Zonin, you can't complain about the name whatsoever, can you?
Big Z, absolutely. But yeah, now we have a couple honorable mentions as well. Love Herenstam, who's a goaltender from Sweden. His first name's Love. How can you go wrong with Love as a first name? We also have Eddie Genborg, who you were pushing for as well. Yes. It's an interesting name. Absolutely interesting name. The most Swedish name I can think of. He sounds like the Swedish chef. Lastly, I think, in my opinion, a very good contender for that top 5.
Yes.
A Russian from Dagestan with the most MMA name you can think of, Ilyas Magomed Sultanov is his name. That's just phenomenal on that side. We have 2 more questions to close things off, though. Talk me through the next one, because Sam Savoy has been an interesting prospect for a couple of years. And Marcus DeLong asks, was Sam Savoy always this fast? Feels like he's come back speedier from getting his legs snapped into.
Yeah, this is a player that I watched a lot in his draft year with the Gatineau Olympique, and he's definitely added a lot of lower body power, a lot of explosiveness, and also upped his stride rate since that draft year. But I saw a lot of that progression come in his D+1, D+2 season as well, so I don't think it was entirely just a result of him getting his legs snapped in half that he's become faster, but the fact that he's skating like he is currently with the Rockford Ice Hogs, despite that massive injury that he incurred, I think is really promising to see for his development, and I'm really glad to see that he's been able to recover from that ugly injury. But to wrap up this first segment, we have a question from Greg Brian George, who asks, can Sam Dickinson play defense well enough to make it in the NHL? All gas, no brakes in the OHL. And we talked about this a little bit in yesterday's episode, where Sam Dickinson can typically focus very well on either defense or offense. And this season, the focus has been on offense while playing 30 minutes a night. Everything's been flowing through him in the offensive zone when he's on the ice. And the defense is taking a bit of a hit as a result of that. But I don't think either of us are overly worried with his defensive projection, because the rush defending tools and habits are just so high end, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's all about kind of shepherding play out, suffocating along the boards. He's pretty big at 6'2", 6'3", but he's not overly physical where he just trucks through guys and all that stuff. It's a lot more about habits, about decision making off the rush. Sometimes he'll pinch really hard and get beat, that kind of stuff. But it's more about, listen, he's playing 30 minutes a night. Like we said in the last episode, brain farts are bound to happen when you're playing that often. And yeah, I've seen him play upwards of 34, 35 minutes this season. That's a lot of ice time for a young defenseman. And we've also talked about this previously with London. The way that they play doesn't really favor decision-making and creativity. It's a lot more about play inside structure, get shots off from the point, play your position, play your role. Dale Hunter plays a very strict structure. So, it's part of the structure as well. It's just Dickinson doing the things that are expected of him from defensemen playing, again, 30 minutes plus a night. So, yeah, I'm not too worried about that kind of that issue moving forward. He's going to figure it out. Most defensemen do. And he's shown enough offensive smarts for me to not be too worried. Like, he makes quick decisions off the rush on breakouts, that kind of stuff. He doesn't need 5, 6, 7 seconds to figure out his next move. So I'm a lot less worried about him than other kind of less intelligent defensemen from the London Knights in the OHL, right? Like we've seen issues with Oliver Bonk, with Logan Mailloux in terms of processing that I don't see being as major issues with Dickinson moving forward. That's our first segment done. We'll get to our second segment of questions. We'll talk about some of the top names in the draft, including Matt Schaefer, who gets a question of his own. We'll get into that in just a sec, but just before, a quick word from our sponsors at FanDuel and Gametime.
Get ready to take on the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need all in one place to place live bets on the NFL. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. Whether you want to take your swings on American football with the NFL, or on European football with the Champions League, the choice really is yours. Or perhaps you prefer tennis or golf, or if you're listening to this podcast, you may just be a hockey fan. Whatever kind of sport floats your boat, FanDuel has something to offer you. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, Gametime is the best place to secure them. Gametime is safe, secure, incredibly easy to use, and they're absolutely obsessed with saving you money. They've got deals every step of the way to make sure you get the best price. Last minute deals, flash deals, zone deals. They've even got the Gametime guarantee to make sure that you always get the best price for your tickets. And they've also got all-in pricing, which you can toggle in the app, and it shows you the price after fees, after taxes, so you know exactly what you're paying for your ticket, and you can make the best decision for your wallet. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. You just create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. So download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment here, we'll be talking about some top-end prospects. First and foremost, we have a question from Soft Serve Scouting that asks, what kind of ceilings do you project for Martone, MISA, Hagens, and Schaefer? Also, is Gavin McKenna a challenger for Bedard's best prospect crown? To answer that second part real quick, I don't think so.
I agree.
Connor Bedard is on another level, and his adaptation to the NHL game is already good and is still ongoing, right? Like he's just absolutely phenomenal. I'd say Gavin McKenna is more on the level of, if you're looking at prime players, and players in the prime, Steven Stamkos, kind of that kind of tier of player. I could see maybe a step above getting into the Matthews conversation, but Connor Bedard's more in the Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid kind of generational style. So
yeah,
I would say, do you see McKenna as potentially a generational player?
I see him more as a franchise player, as you mentioned, than a generational talent.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, he hasn't even played his draft year yet, and he is first in league scoring as a D-1. There's so much to like with this player, and if he were eligible for the 2025 draft class, he would be going first overall. So he's a fantastic player, a lot to like with McKenna, but I think that Bedard bar is set very, very high, and we'd have to see some really significant strides in McKenna's ability to just take control of games and dominate end to end for him to really become a big challenger to that crown. But to get to the first part of the question, let's start off with MISA and Hagens. Where do you think their ceilings lie? They're definitely in that 1C upside is, I think, obvious, but how much further does the upside extend beyond that?
Well, I'm working currently on a video for Michael Misa for the Elite Prospects channel, and the more I cut tape of him, the more I delve into the details of this game, the more I see John Tavares as your kind of comparable projection. Very, very, very detailed. Everything he does is just steeped in details. From the offense, the playmaking, the goal scoring, the stick handling is all very detailed, very mature, very polished. But also the off-puck game, the off-puck routes, the positioning, the forechecking, the back-checking, the motor. There's a lot that's really, really, really refined with Misa. So I think if you're thinking of upside, I'm thinking in that range of John Tavares in terms of the way that they impact the game, the energy they bring, the leadership capabilities they bring. Misa's definitely up there. with John Tavares. And for James Hagens, I think the true upside, although it's less clear, is Jack Hughes, right? He's got that real good transition ability, but he's also got the motor, the energy on forechecks and back checks. He's got the ability to impact play in all three zones. But really, it's the skill, the transition skill, really that shines the most with Hagens. So maybe kind of a beta version of Jack Hughes is what I'd say, but still a 1C, still a definite like first line center in terms of pure upside. And for Porter Martone, what's your read on him?
I think like the comp that we've had all season long is the one I keep kind of coming back to the more I'm watching of Martone, and that's like an amped up Corey Perry as like the ultimate upside in terms of physicality, the aggression, the desire to hurt opponents, the ability to go to cross those lines and go like too much in terms of violence and physicality, and perhaps not containing it quite as much. It's not like consistent physicality shift to shift. It is explosions of physicality a couple times a game where he can get suspended, he can get thrown out of games. That does happen to Martone, but with a puck on his stick, he's a dangerous goal scorer. His really great puck skills, constantly attacking the middle of the ice. I've loved the progression in his off puck movement in the offensive zone this season, and also those leadership capabilities and leading by example so often. I mean, he is one of the few draft eligible captains in the CHL this season with the Brampton Steelheads. There's a lot to like with Martone, so I think Corey Perry style of player is still where I fall with the ultimate upside. And as for Matt Schaefer, I think top pairing defense is definitely what we see in the ultimate upside with Schaefer. In terms of floor, I would say second pairing. I think this is a very safe projection in terms of you're getting a valuable player basically no matter what. With his combination of intelligence and mobility, he can shut down play so well. He's so effective at both ends of the ice. And in terms of player comps, is there anyone that really jumps to mind for you for Matt Schaefer?
I maybe Alex Pietrangelo, kind of that kind of tier player, and I feel like he's the guy that everyone defaults to when we talk about big mobile defensemen. But it's a lot clearer with Schaefer than it was, for example, last year with Sam Dickinson, who was often compared to. Moving forward, we also have another question about Matt Schaefer in detail. How would Matt Schaefer compare to the top defenseman from the past two drafts? Thanks, and it's Daryl asking this. Thank you, Daryl, for the question. If we're looking at top defensemen from the past two drafts, I think Zane Parek's probably half a tier above him. Sam Dickinson, I'd say, is probably in the same tier, maybe a tier below. And in terms of the 2022 NHL draft, if you look at Simon Niemetz and the 2020. Yeah, the 2022 NHL draft.
23. You're fitting the Reinbacher draft.
Oh,
the
right.
Draft.
That's right. I skipped one. So Reinbacher, Simashev, I don't think compare to Matt Schaefer. He's well above them. So, if you look at those tiers of guys, I think, him and Zane Parekh are probably the closest to each other. I think he's a step above Dickinson, a step above the other two from the 2023 class. Anything to add before we move forward?
Yeah, I think that personally, I think Schaefer would currently be above Parekh for me. Even though it's tight, I think that Schaefer is a bit more versatile, especially in the defensive zone than Parekh is. But moving on to the next question from Marcus DeLong, who asks, who is the first overager on the board? And I'll preface this by saying it's still very early for the overagers. We were very much focusing on the draft eligible talents still, the first time eligibles. But in terms of overagers that have made a mark this season, one name that comes to mind for me is Luke Mistelbacher out of the WHL. He sits in second or third in league scoring there. He's been on fire after being undrafted last season. He's a bit undersized at 6 feet and just over 160 pounds. So I don't know if he'll be the top drafted overager this coming draft. It's probably going to be a goalie that comes out of nowhere in the coming months. But is there any other play that comes to mind for you?
Maybe Thomas Desruisseaux out of the queue, but really, this is very early. We're still early in our viewing, still very much focused on our regions, that kind of thing. Casey Lee, a longtime listener of the show, he was listening to the show before Sebastian came in.
I know.
Thank you for the question, Casey. Which players do you think have the potential to be a steal in the first, second round? I think the answer starts and ends with Cameron Schmidt. I think he's going to be a faller on draft day. I think teams are going to be very hesitant regarding his size and, like you've mentioned already, regarding Smith, the quote-unquote attitude, things that really aren't founded in anything concrete so far. There's a chance he slips out in the first round. He would be the first 5'7" prospect drafted in the first round if he is picked there.
Yeah.
He's definitely a steal. There's other contenders: Ben Kevon, Jack Murtaugh, those types of guys. I also think maybe Philippe Veilleux might be a late second rounder who could end up being very, very good if he pops off. There's a couple of contenders in there. And lastly, from James Conley, who do you think has the best chance of being drafted in the top 4 that is not one of the consensus top 4 talents at the moment? We discussed this a bit before recording. We kind of settled on Anton Frondel. What do you think, though?
Yeah, I think there's like 3 names that come to mind. Anton Frondel, I think it's very possible that a team just stays in love with the player, even if things haven't been overly smooth so far this season. I think the big name, both physically and in terms of like perhaps the most likely, is probably Roger McQueen once he comes back from injury. He's obviously missed a good deal of the season so far after starting the season on fire with 8 goals in 8 games in the WHL with the Brandon Wheat Kings. I think he could make his way into that top 4, especially because he is a skilled, big, mobile centerman. But the other possible contender is Malcolm Spence, right?
Yeah, 100%. He's one of the most detailed prospects in this draft. You could just drop him in an NHL lineup tomorrow, and he'd find a way to be impactful. A lot of what he does is very, very polished. But that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll get into our third segment here, where we'll talk a bit more about Anton Frondel and some couple other interesting prospects. We'll get into that in just a sec. But just before, a quick word from our sponsors at PrizePicks.
PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineups stay live even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, PrizePicks will keep your lineup in place. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Do you think Connor McDavid can score more than 1.5 goals next week? Austin Matthews even more than that? Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this hockey season when you and your crew run your game with PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code LOCKEDONNHL. PrizePicks. Run your game.
Alrighty, so let's close things off here with the final segment. We'll talk about some more 2025 prospects and also some questions about some drafted prospects as well. We'll start off with this question from Luke Heinzman, who asks, where do you think Anton Frondel ends up by draft time? He could end up anywhere, really. I mean, we already talked about this. Maybe a team in the top 4, top 5 stays in love with the prospect despite things not going well for him this year, either at the Allsvenskan or J20 level in Sweden. He could go in the top 5, but I think more realistically, we're probably talking about a 7 to 12 prospect in terms of what is likely to happen. Even teams will be concerned about what's going on with him over in Sweden. It's very, very concerning, especially given that last year he was one of, if not the best prospect in the J20 as a draft -1. And now he's struggling to perform in the same league. So it's a very peculiar development, but I think 7 to 12 is where he pops off. Do you agree?
I think 6 to 10, so slight difference. I do think that his profile as a physically mature, highly intelligent 2-way center is still going to be very interesting for teams, especially because he also has a really blistering release. In terms of recent prospect comparables, I see a lot of similarities between Anton Frondel and Dalibor Dvorsky, and Dvorsky went 10th overall in that 2023 draft class, or was it 9th even to St. Louis? It was
I think so. I think it was 9th. Yeah.
I think it was 9th overall. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of the range for Frondel. He might go slightly higher, but even in terms of just the hype going into the draft year season, I definitely see comparisons to Dvorsky. Next, we have a question that's really made for you from Jacob Titus, who asks, thoughts on Philippe Veilleux? He's having a massive November so far, scoring at a 2-point per game pace this month. And we've been talking about him a decent amount in the last couple episodes, but what are your thoughts on this? How has he been progressing?
Yeah, he's been progressing in the sense that he's gotten a lot more polish in terms of skating and in terms of processing. A lot of the issues this year was that he was mainly just a peripheral playmaker. Now he's getting more comfortable with the puck, moving into space in the offensive zone and taking shots off himself. He's really good at kicking out from the net front to the half wall on the power play to just quickly find a pocket to shoot. He's getting a lot of his goals that way. And just again, the reads are really, really good. The playmaking processing, he shoots for rebounds, positions himself really well, finds teammates in the slot. His reads of the game have gotten much better over the past couple of weeks, and he's shooting more. I think that's the main combination that's leading to this increase in points. I'm a lot more sold on him now than it was last year at the start of this year. Started off the season with 7 points in 12 games. That's not nearly enough. But yeah, like you said, 18 points in 10 games in the past month. So he's been doing fairly well on that side. Now we do have a question from Finn Co over on Twitter, who asks a couple of Sharks prospects questions. First, what does Luca Cagnoni still need to do to get NHL ready, and how long should it take? And Kasper Halttunen got sent back to London, but is there room for him on such a stacked Knights lineup? To answer the second part first, absolutely. The London Knights, will make space for Kasper Halttunen. He was one of their best scorers last year. He's going to be that again this year. So yeah, that's we can get that out of the way. They're going to make space for him. He's that good.
Absolutely.
But in terms of Luca Cagnoni, what's your read on Cagnoni? In terms of what you think? I've got my opinions. You know how much I love this prospect. I had him in my top 20 in his draft year. But yeah, what's your thoughts on him?
Such a seamless transition to pro hockey so far for Cagnoni. He's been playing with the San Jose Barracuda, and through 14 games, he has 5 goals and 15 points. Over a point-a-game start from the blue line at the AHL level is more than you could have hoped for Luca Cagnoni as an undersized 5'9", 181-pound left shot defenseman. In terms of what he still needs to do, it really is just further develop the things that he's already very good at. While also, I think, with the one key area being his ability to resist contact and the resistance to being boxed out at the net front. The cycle is really, I think, where he can be exploited defensively the most. His rush defending is quite solid, really good stick work, really good footwork as well. He's a fantastic skater. So the rush defending is not something I'm really concerned about. He's very good at containing play, a bit less of a play killer while defending the rush, but he shepherds play to the outside. He limits any chances going towards the slot. So not very concerned with the rush defending, but the cycle defense, I think, the intelligence and the intensity are always there, but that ability to outmuscle big physical professional opponents is still developing. So if he plays the entire season in the AHL with just a stint or two in the NHL, I think that's more than fine. I do think that by next season, he may very well be a full-time NHLer, though. Yeah. I would expect him to get a stint or two this year just to see where he's at against NHL competition.
Yeah, it's also a confidence thing, right? Like, he tends to utilize his defense partner a lot to defend. He's more of a container where he's kind of going to try to stifle the player who's going for a retrieval instead of, killing the play himself. I think that's a confidence thing as well. So just getting more confident in his abilities as a defender will be very important. Last question of the episode. We have a question from Mighty D over on YouTube who asks, how is Beckett Sennecke playing this season? Obviously, he's scoring a lot. He's now listed at 6'4", 195 pounds. Is he able to leverage his frame more to his advantage as he continues to get stronger? Does he look more comfortable on his skates and has a seemingly increased strength, added new elements to his game? I'm seeing the exact same Beckett Sennecke I saw late last year. Not much progression, but that still makes him a very good prospect. His point totals speak for themselves. Yeah. If you're looking at the type of player, he's always very good at leveraging his frame. That's something, because he's a late bloomer, he's had to adapt to a smaller frame earlier and quicker. So the tools that you have to leverage are the same at 6'4" that they are at 5'10". You get under opponents' hands, you cut off their hands along the boards, lower your center of gravity on your hits, reverse hits, small, little changes in weight transfers in order to win battles. All that's the same with Sennecke. But yeah, it's mainly because I believe he was injured at the start of the year, missed a couple of games. It's normal that we haven't seen much progression at this point. I think by the time you hit January, February, March, I think you're going to see a lot more. A more comfortable Beckett Sennecke is showing more elements. But, there's a reason went third overall in this draft year, right?
Absolutely. And I also mean the progression that he showed in the back half of last season was more than most players progress in an off season typically.
Yeah.
So I think he's already kind of had his big leap for like the 2024 year in terms of skill progression. And it just came a little bit earlier than the off season is all. But I agree. I've seen a lot more of the same with Sennecke, and that's been a good thing. He's been able to sustain the play that he had at the back half of last season, which is what you wanted to see.
Yeah.
And he still has a lot of time to further build on that. Like, this is a player that will keep developing well into his early 20s. Like, he's not going to stagnate in his development at 19 or 20 years old. There's still a lot of like, I think, as the commenter mentioned, a bit of wonkiness on his feet still, right? And that's going to refine with time, and it's going to take a bit longer than one off season to kind of iron out those little wonky details.
Absolutely. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, remember to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And remember to check out our other episodes here as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of November. It's been Hattie Kalikesh with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.